What is the last thing you want to know?
This is something that I like to ask people who've been doing things for a while. Yeah. What I want to know is, knowing what you know now, what might you have done differently when you started, whatever definition you want for
Mhm,
start? Not necessarily to say beat yourself up for having made a mistake,
mhm.
but rather as something that you would give to your audience as, here's something I would have done differently that perhaps you could learn from today.
Yeah. The first thing I'll say is that what's interesting, because in thinking about this, at times it's hard. It's a hard question to answer if you're someone who I don't have a lot of regrets, right? So and I don't mean that to say, oh, everything's perfect. Far from it. Like I had plenty of failures, but I don't have a lot of regrets, right?
Mhm.
So what I mean by that is I think that when I think back to what I did, there's not a lot of stuff that I go, that was a mistake. I go, oh, that didn't really work. But the lessons I learned from that helped me get to this other thing. So there's not a lot of stuff that I would quote unquote undo or completely do differently. But that said, I do have, and I'm actually going to give you things I would have done differently in three different areas. So clearly I have plenty of stuff that I would have done differently. And a lot of this is based on stuff that I learned afterwards. This evolved after that and went, oh, yeah, that's a better approach maybe than before. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what I would do differently on Twitter, what I would have done differently with my newsletter, and what I would do differently as a consultant. So, first, what I would have done differently on Twitter is a couple things. One is I would have focused solely on Twitter and not messed around on Facebook or Instagram or multiple other platforms. One of the biggest things I've learned, and I say this to people all the time, especially when you're starting out and you don't have a huge audience, you're way better off focusing on a single platform. To succeed on any of these platforms takes a lot of time and effort and energy and engaging with people. And to do that right, you really need to focus whatever time you have to spend on it on a single platform. When I eventually, and this was years into it, did that, when I eventually said, you know what, forget this posting on Facebook and Instagram and all this different stuff, I'm just going to focus on Twitter. That's when my Twitter audience really started taking off. The other piece of that is, and this is related, the reason it started taking off was because I was able to engage with more people. I was able to take that time that was being spread across multiple platforms, focus it in one area. And then the other thing I would say is around that same time, I focused my tweets really only on my specific topics and niche. I was no longer tweeting random stuff about some TV show I watched or what I thought of the basketball game, or even though the majority was always about my niche of sort of audience and business growth, I went from maybe 80% audience and business growth and a couple random things to only audience and business growth. And the combination of that focus with all my time being focused on that one platform is literally when my Twitter started growing. I'd been on Twitter since whatever, 2007 or a long time ago. And for years, I didn't really get much out of it. But as soon as I did that, it really took off. So that is definitely something I would do differently when I think back to it. As far as my newsletter goes, the thing, and I have an episode about this where I talk all about my newsletter ads and introducing them. We'll put a link in the show notes. But the thing I would have done different is I would have launched ads in my newsletter much sooner. I strongly believe for the first 4 to 5 years of my newsletter, it was a long time. I was publishing every week. All that time, I had a premise and a belief that ads were inherently bad for readers. I had an idea and truly believed that the incentives were misaligned, that they would annoy readers, that I'd fall into the trap of catering to advertisers, which would make the newsletter less enjoyable or less valuable for readers, was strongly against them. And then when I eventually shifted, and I talk about this in the other episode, but long story short, one of my readers reached out, said she had run an ad in a similar newsletter and it was really helpful for her. She got all this stuff. Did I know anywhere else she could run them? And I came to realize that, oh, these ads could actually not only help my readers who might want to run ads, but help my audience if the ads were promoting things that were valuable to them. And then I started experimenting with it, starting to run the ads. They've been fantastic. My audience loves the ads. They've become a really great source of monetization for me. People love running them. It's been a like win-win-win on every level and 180 degrees from what my initial beliefs were. And that isn't to say that I would have necessarily launched the ads right off the bat, because I do think you want to sort of build an audience and figure out what you're doing first, right? But I definitely would not have waited 4 or 5 years to do so. And then the third thing is that I would have done differently as relates to my consulting is it has to do with, I think, choosing clients and choosing the type of work that I would take on. I left a really good job and went out on my own as a consultant, and you don't know. Maybe you're going to get clients, maybe you're not. So some of it was at first you take what you get and you figure it out as you go. But even with that said, relatively quickly, I got to a place where it was financially stable enough. It wasn't like, oh, I had to take anything that came my way. And there, not a lot, but there were certainly clients that I had a bad feeling going into it, where I was like, this probably isn't, and not even that my work would not be good enough, but there were one of the red flags I realized, and again, this is only like a couple clients, certainly not many of them, but I realized that at times there would be a client who maybe wasn't that familiar with me or my work. They had been maybe referred by somebody else. Their goals, the way I think about it is they weren't really interested in serving their audience. They were interested in maybe they had a course and they were interested in selling the course and they had no audience up to that point. They weren't blogging. They weren't using social media. They heard they could make a course and sell it based on their expertise. And now we're going to make money. And a, they didn't have that commitment or desire to really, they thought it'd be easier than it would be. And yeah, I could help you run Facebook ads and I could help you do whatever. But the truth is nobody knows who you are. You haven't created any trust or value or any of that stuff. And I knew that in the back of my head, like that was not a client that I should have taken on. I knew I could help them, but I also knew this isn't going to work the way this guy thinks it's going to work. And you can tell the kind of people that they're not really going to put in what it takes to do this right because they're not really motivated to do that. Right. Like even the course that they had created was half-assed and, bare minimum, whatever. So I would have done less of that. The other thing I would have done is for the most part, I think with consulting, or services, there's done for you. I could either do it for you or I could teach you how to do it. And which is more sort of strategy. And in the beginning, I was doing some of both. Ultimately, I realized I don't want to do the done for you work. I want to do the strategy. I want to help you, show you how to do it. I'm not looking for you pay me a monthly retainer for the next 20 years while I manage your social media accounts or any of that stuff. It became very clear to me relatively quickly that I didn't want to do done for you stuff. But initially I was doing some of that, right? Oh, I can run Facebook ads, so I'll take on this Facebook client. Like I can ghostwrite stuff, so I'll take on ghostwriting clients. It was very helpful for me, I think, to get clear in my own head that just because I could do that stuff doesn't mean I need to or want to take on those clients, right? And so that sort of done for you versus teaching you how to do it then became a very clear dividing line for me. And it helped me decide, is this a client I should take on or not? And helped me even in talking to people, hey, this is what I do versus I can help you with social media. And they're like, oh, can you write my posts? Can you, what? No, I don't do that. So I think those are the things that I would have done different on the consulting front. But again, with all this stuff, I don't know how I would have gotten to any of those places without without that evolution and making those mistakes.
We're here because of the decisions and path we took. And it's great. Lessons learned and all that. But still, those lessons learned can have value for others.
Yeah. So let me ask you, as we wrap this up, I'll flip it around and ask you a question. You've had your newsletter forever. What would you have done differently?
Started it earlier.
Wait. You have to tell people, when did you start again?
I started Ask Leo in 2003, August the 10th, actually, of 2003,
Okay.
when the first article got published. And I did not want to be a newsletter publisher. I don't know why. I just didn't. So I relied on SEO, like we talked about earlier, to bring me people. And I really didn't have anything to do with them other than show them an answer. It wasn't until 2 years later, at least, 2005, when I actually started what would turn into today's newsletter. And yeah, that's my go-to answer. What would I have done differently? I would have started that the same day.
Yeah.
Or same day.
By the way, I love that you said that, because I feel like I know I didn't answer that, but it's funny. I almost take it as a given for myself. I feel like almost any successful newsletter creator you talk to would say the same thing. They would be like, I wish I would have started it earlier.
Yeah, the value
Right?
you become apparent until you realize you don't have a way to hang on to the folks that have come to visit you when Google changes their algorithm or when Facebook changes their algorithm or whatever.